Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of SportsDay Rangers. I'm John Blake.
And I'm Evan Grant.
Well, Evan, when we were talking last week at this time, it looked like things were going in the right direction. Rangers had won 9 of 12 games at the end of May, and here we are. They've lost 4 of 5. They've lost consecutive series. As we tape this on Thursday morning, and with one more against the Twins and then 3 against the Padres, before hitting the road again for a 10-game road trip.
Yeah, it's been a frustrating stretch without a doubt for this club. And it's been frustrating in that Corey Seager was back for a week and now he's on the IL again, this time with a concussion. Evan Carter is back on the IL and has been on the IL every year that he's been on the opening day roster. And the starting pitching is struggling early in games, and that's always been this club's biggest strong point.
And then, as we talked about, the Rangers are hanging in there in a division that the team that's leading the division as of today is 1 game over 500, and the Rangers are just 2 games back. And again, they're in a stretch where they're playing teams. They play San Diego this weekend that has not played well. Then they go on the road and play the Marlins and the Blue Jays, who have both struggled. But at some point, you got to start winning some of these games.
Yeah, John, I mean, and we can get into this more. I want to make sure that everybody knows that our guest this week is a really special guest. It's actually the longest tenured player in the Rangers organization. And I'll pause just for a second here to see if anybody knows who that might be. Probably not. It's high leverage Jacob Latz. He was drafted by the Rangers out of Kent State in 2017 as a 5th-round draft pick.
And for the archives in Arlington, we're going to kind of tag Jake's success a little bit with the longer saves and look at arguably what was the best relief season in Rangers history back in 1979 by a 6'5" right-handed reliever whose nickname was Emu.
All right, back to the formal disclosure portion of the program. You guys can reach out to us on X with any Rangers questions or comments. I remain at Evan_P_Grant, and he is at Ranger Blake.
So to talk about the team, and I obviously, and Evan, as I was thinking about this last night and look at this Rangers team this year, they don't seem to, when they have leads late in games, they don't see. Both of us have been around a lot of Ranger teams that didn't hold leads late in game. This team, it seems, once they get behind, they have a really hard time coming back to win. And this first inning situation, which again reared its ugly head on Tuesday night with Kumar Rocker on the mound, and you pointed out a pretty good stat, I think, on this. The 14th time the Rangers have allowed multiple runs in the first inning, and they are 0-14 in those games, averaging just over 2 runs a game. What do you attribute? I mean, and 10 leadoff home runs by the opposition? What do you attribute that to?
I mean, I think the leadoff home runs by oppositions are kind of a freak stat.
Right.
And look, if you give up a solo homer, it's a little bit it's a little bit deflating, but it shouldn't be anything that alters the outcome of the game. I just think that, look, this offense, from my perspective, from where I sit and the way I watch the games play out, and you look at the fact that the run differential in these games is basically about a 3-run differential, they're not close. And it feels to me like by the time the club gets in the dugout after the first inning, they're already beaten. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of fight left in them. I asked that question of Jake Berger after the game on Tuesday night, and he said he agreed it's something that needed to be addressed, because it just seems like they feel themselves like they're beaten after they get down by something as little as 2 runs in the first inning.
Do you attribute that a little bit? I mean, there are a lot of players right now due to injuries and other things on this roster that don't have a lot of major league time. I mean, Asuna and Foscue and even guys like Smith and Duran are not what I would call veteran major league players, and haven't been through that as much. When you have to try to grind it out for 9 innings and come back, and could that be a factor here in this, or is it?
I don't. I mean, I don't believe so. I think that there are enough veteran players, and in particular, you've got Brandon Nimmo there, who's a really positive guy.
Right.
This shouldn't wear on this team this much, but it does, and it's hard to find an explanation for it, John. I can't really find one. I know it's not the way Skip Schumacher runs a dugout or runs a game, to think that, you're down 2 runs and you're beaten. But it's been hard to watch.
And it's somewhat incumbent on the starting pitchers too. Rangers starting pitchers last year went deeper into ball games. This year, I didn't realize when Eovaldi and Gore went back-to-back 7 innings was the first time they'd had back-to-back starts of 7 or more innings this year by a starter. But again, veteran starters who've got to shut down innings early in a game are pretty important.
Absolutely. It's important for this starting rotation to get early shutdown innings and to give the offense a chance to get on track. But all of that said, this wasn't going to be the same rotation that they had last year. It wasn't going to be indomitable. And this offense should be better than it was last year. And in large parts, there are guys who are performing much better than they did last year. But why there is an inability for this team to bounce back after early deficits is just, it's beyond me. And on the flip side, John, and we've cited this stat before, if this team does get out to a quick start, if the Rangers do get out to a quick start, if they score first, and if they get to 4 runs,
right,
they're unbeatable. They are 22-1. They are the best team in the big leagues. And to me, it all only reinforces that until you get Corey Seager on track, until you get Wyatt Langford on track, this team has to do everything it can to get to that 4-run threshold as fast as possible. I do know that when you're down a couple of runs early in the game, you especially after a long first inning, you come in to hit at home, and you're a little bit on the defensive, trying to take some pitches early to get your pitcher a breather. That may lead to being behind in counts and put you into a defensive stance. But the Rangers have to get out to 4 runs. That's what they have to do in order to win games. And that must be, in my mind, the emphasis for the offense going forward.
Well, let's talk a little bit about lineup construction here. And again, with Seager out now, with Carter out, you having some allergies? You're a little allergic to this podcast here, Evan, or what? You're probably allergic. I see you wearing a Georgia shirt, and my condolences. They were beaten like a drum last night by Oklahoma. So
yes, they were, but at least they knocked Texas out. So
yes, yeah, exactly. But anyway, getting back to roster construction. With Seager and Carter out, Skip Schumacher is going to have to platoon more, obviously, especially up the middle, shortstop, second base, center field. How do you see that playing out with getting Josh Smith back and dividing up the playing time here?
Well, I mean, he's got a ton of versatile players in Smith, a left-handed hitter, Lopez, a left-handed hitter, Duran, a right-handed hitter, Freeman, a right-handed hitter, and Justin Foscue's not terribly versatile, but he's also a right-handed hitter who figures into the second base mix. So I think he's got the ability to basically platoon as he needs to in the middle of the field. That said, these are premier defensive positions. You don't want to have to platoon at those positions if you can avoid it. So it's not ideal, but I think all of these guys And then if you take the versatility and take the infield portion out of it, Alejandro Osuna is very, very versatile in the outfield as well. If you take all of that out of it, you've got the ability to put out guys who have bought into the run manufacturing, run optimization type of approach. But the question still remains, are these guys big league hitters? Duran's really made strides this year. The other guys have taken some very good at bats, but I don't know if they've got enough just pure hitting ability to carry themselves. So, you do have versatility, but you are somewhat limited offensively. So it comes back to this, right? When you're playing depth players, every player has a flaw, John. I mean, Corey Seager's a great player. He has a flaw that he's somewhat injury prone. Every player has a flaw, and when you're going to depth, those flaws present themselves a little bit more obviously.
We'll close this segment. You mentioned Seager again having back issues and the other issues he's had this year. Do you think when he does come back, he's going to have to see more time in the DH role, which again is hard because your other DH is left-handed in Jock Peterson. But you've got to find ways to, because if he doesn't get in the lineup, obviously you're not going to get him jump-started offensively. So
yeah, and the other issue there, John, is Corey doesn't really like to DH. He wants to play shortstop, and there's going to have to be some kind of agreement reached to get him on the field more often, because right now, I mean, I figured this out the other day. I think if he were to come back on Friday, the day he's first eligible to clear the concussion protocol, if he comes back on Friday and plays every day the rest of the season, he'll get to about 130 or 132 starts over the course of the year. And then if you take that out over the 5-year period that he's with the Rangers, he's averaging about 123 games a year. So he's averaging about 75% of the games. He's a really good player, but this team misses him tremendously when he's out, and you've got to find ways to get that closer to 80 or 85% of the games that they're able to count on Corey Seager being somewhere in their lineup.
Well, let's move on to our guest this week, and it's left-hander and left-handed reliever Jacob Latz, who has been the savior at the end of the bullpen this year, getting a lot of publicity over being able to have these multi-inning saves, but a guy that was a top candidate for fifth starter this year. Kumar Rocker got the position, and Jacob has had a long and winding road to get to this point, and we'll talk to him next. Well, our guest on this week's edition of SportsDay Rangers is Rangers lefty Jacob Latz, who has become the high-leverage reliever at the end of the bullpen in the first 3 months here of the 2026 season with excellent results. But a couple of things here. This is his 9th year in the organization, which is longer than any other organizational player. He was drafted in 2017 in the 5th round out of Kent State. And then the next few years, he made his major league debut. Ranger fans might remember a COVID debut in 2021, which is another story altogether, Evan, in our time in Boston on that trip. And then Jake showed up in Cleveland and made one start. Then he was back in 23, got a World Series ring, and it's gone from there to have an outstanding first half. So, Jake, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, you guys, for having me.
And just a little context here, John, right? Jake is so well tenured in the Rangers organization that he's literally, I think, the only player left who dealt with you as the PR guy.
That might be true. Yes, that might be true. But anyway, we will digress from that. And he also picked up another save yesterday, Evan, without even pitching in the game. So
that's how good he's been this year.
Got his 12th save. So congrats on that. Yeah. So I just wanted to, because I was looking back and you were drafted in the 5th round in 2017. You pitched your freshman year, right, at LSU. And then transferred, and it was a redshirt year, right, at Kent State. So how did the Rangers, and you didn't pitch that year in a regular game. So, how did all that come about?
Yeah, I mean, so freshman year, I dealt with the injury, an elbow injury, the entire year. Tried to make it back on several occasions, and just every time I got to the mound phase, started to feel the same pain symptoms in the elbow, and had to shut it down. And then sophomore year, I came back to LSU and was kind of the same way, hopeful that can get a healthy season, start my college career there, and get off to a good start and see where it goes. And the same elbow problems kind of came up. We were having our last like practice series before the season was going to get started, and it came back in a worse way. So we had to get surgery right before the season started, a stress fracture in my elbow to put the screw in. And so that put me out until May. So it was right around like conference tournament play. And so I basically got 8 innings my sophomore year there once I was ready to come back. And after that season ended, I just was still experiencing, problems with the elbow, and was really, you know, trying to figure out why that was the case, and talking with the coaching staff, and just, the journey that I was on at that point with LSU, was probably best to just get a change of scenery and start fresh somewhere else. So and I really wanted to play college baseball still. I basically missed, those 2 seasons, and didn't really have fun because I was in pain the whole time. And so started looking at options, and still wanted to go to Division 1 route. Kent State was a place that stuck out to me because I had known the head coach there from my high school recruiting days, and then also they had success at that time getting waivers for players to transfer from season to season, and be able to play without having to sit out. So that was my number one goal, and ultimately why I chose Kent State. And that process also took me all the way until a week and a half before the season to hear back from the NCAA if I was going to play or not.
Um,
Um, and so at that time, it was my redshirt sophomore year, but I was a junior, and had prepared to play the season like any other season. I was healthy finally, and then the NCAA came back, like I said, and said I was ineligible to play, and that I would have to sit out that year like everyone else, and try again my redshirt junior year. So uh that was another slap in the face for me, as something I had to deal with, and just tried to stay positive through the whole thing. And they were really good about how they were able to keep my spirits up, and tell me that I'm still going to make an impact on the team. Um I'm going to throw to them basically every Wednesday in a live BP situation. Sometimes there would be fielders out there, but other times there wouldn't be. And luckily scouts started to show up as the weather started to get better, and the Rangers were a team that had history on me, and knew me from high school. And so, uh, they were a team that was heavily in the mix. And then ultimately that year, they still chose to take me in the fifth round. And,
oh,
here we are today.
And Jake, we've talked about this. We talked about this spring when we sat
Mhm.
down to talk about your journey. And, I think you feel like all of that you went through prepared you to kind of be in a position to handle what was an uncertain role going into spring training and into the season in a
Mhm.
really positive way. Yay or nay on that?
Yeah, 100%. I was fairly smooth sailing throughout, my childhood, and into high school, and didn't really deal with too many, issues. And it just seemed like ever since I stepped foot on campus, things came about, and that were out of my control. And I had to just learn to deal with them. And so I built up a pretty high tolerance for adversity, and the unknown, and it kind of came my norm in a way, and so it served me well. I think it would serve anyone well, just in life, really, more so than just a baseball field. But baseball has a funny way of giving you life situations that mirror it in a way, and so yeah, we came into spring and I was battling for a fifth rotation spot after coming off a good year where I felt like I showed enough to at least give myself a really good chance to do it. And so um either way I was okay with it because of, the fact that I already knew that I had success at the major league level.
Could you have envisioned this role playing out the way it has?
I don't know. I mean, the easy answer is definitely no. Getting moved to the bullpen, I had at least hoped, I mentioned that I would be in a leverage situation. We had a number of guys that were capable of pitching in the ninth inning with us. So, I definitely didn't have that on my radar going into the year. Would I have hoped that that was a possibility down the road? Sure. But, this soon, especially this season, no, I don't, there's no way I could have thought about that.
What is the mindset I mean, you've pitched a lot in relief. You pitched some high leverage last year, but what does it did you have to kind of like change your whole mindset going into the season? And then, you weren't anointed as the closer, but they said high leverage at the end. Does that
Right, right.
change the way your mind kind of has to handle that and everything, or?
It does change. I was in starter mode this whole spring and then breaking camp even. So it was a little bit of a shock to the system. My outing in the exhibition game, it was pretty foreign again. It really was. And then, Philly, it changed back to the starter,
Right,
and then I got moved back to the bullpen again.
right.
So it was different at first, and then I just, once I made the adjustment, it just incrementally started to get better, and how I was comfortable out there, more so from a routine standpoint than a situational standpoint, just because, I liked the way that I was able to slowly build into the game as opposed to, getting hot like that, and so that was really the biggest battle coming into this year, and then, from an 8th inning to ninth inning standpoint, I don't think it should change mentally, personally. You should try to trick yourself into it's the same no matter where I'm at, but the game forces you to raise your mental focus and just your, you know, ability to reach back for a little bit more when you're put into those really back end high leverage situations. But I just think that that comes more natural than anything.
So, the thing for me, and I've built your, not that I have a whole lot of yank, but I've built your all-star case on not just your numbers, but the fact that you've like been a throwback kind of weapon. And I think it's now 6 saves of more than
Yeah.
one inning, which is the
Now
most in
that
the
leads
major
the
league.
majors, right? Because
Yeah,
he went ahead of Mason Miller. Yep.
yeah. Um, does how do you how do you approach that element of it? Like, do you like the fact that you have become a uh, a different weapon than than a traditional closer, or what closers are today?
Um, I just I think it's definitely an added value point to be able to show the ability to do something like that. You know, I don't think it was something that seemed as a daunting task because of the fact that I've had a, pretty good build up in spring and I had a really good foundation underneath me. If I was asked to do that by just doing the normal reliever build up workload in camp, and it'd be a little bit different, but it just it seemed easier to go one, especially one, but one to even 2 innings because of how I was asked to throw 75, 80 pitches by the end of camp. Um, and I think they made it known to me that I wasn't just gonna be a one-inning guy anyway, so, um but the first time I did it against Seattle, I went to the 7th and the 8th inning, and, it was one of those things where I did it in a one-run game, and I was just like, "Wow," like, that was that was different, you know, like 'cause it is any little thing, any little break that doesn't go your way or a walk or here, like, the game's susceptible to get you really quickly, so, um, it is a different animal when you're getting to those later part of the innings, but I just try to block it all out as best as I can, and I really just try to focus on the pitch at hand. It's something Mike Maddox will always tell us as pitchers, and it's going to stick with me for my career. I know that. And it's just one of those things where like you can't think about the what if. You just have to try to execute the task at hand.
But I just want to go back to one incident for me, and that is last week in Kansas City. Because you were pitching on back-to-back days. You
Uh-huh.
were asked to come in on the second day, and specifically because Pasquantino and Caglione were coming up in the eighth inning. You didn't have a ton of pitches to work with per Skip Schumacher. I know he didn't tell you this before the game. Um, but it's like you knew the situation. You knew you had limited number of pitches to work with, and you were on the attack. And so you did understand everything and did go out, and I think it was 15 pitches that day, right? And
Yeah.
14 strikes
15.
to record the last 4 outs of the game. Um, or that no, that was that did you go 2 that day? Did you go 2 on
No,
Thursday?
that was until a full two.
Full 2 in 15 pitches. And so it just feels to me like there is this kind of awareness on your part that you're different, and that you have the self-awareness to know what you need to do that day to fulfill your role, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I like being engaged in the game. You know, and that doesn't just mean like when the game starts, you know, leading up to the game and preparing for the next one and, you know, doing the research and so I think just being prepared helps when it comes time for a situation like that. Like, all right, where's my easy out? Not easy outs, but where's like my quicker outs? Like where are they gonna swing and hopefully either beat it into the ground or you know hit it in the air and see if our outfielders can run one down. But I in that situation too, it was I knew I was limited, but once I got 2 quick outs, it was easier to just kind of you know continue to attack and let it eat. With no one on base too, I'm trying to make sure that I make action happen early. Um, so yeah, it's experience is a big helper too. I feel like now having, you know, just a couple of years under my belt, not a lot by any means, but it helps kind of just understand the flow of the game and the situation at hand at the big league level um a little bit easier.
So 2 quick questions. 1, do you blame me for blowing your season opening no-hitter by mentioning it after 30 batters or whatever it was?
I don't I won't sit here and blame you to your face, but I might be thinking about it in my head as to why it happens.
I'll take the blame. I mean, it's fine by me. And the second thing is, how do you feel about my new nickname for you, Jacob High Leverage Latz?
So where did we start?
We went Jake
We
squared with you and
Jake
Junis.
squared, Jake and Bake. Well, we gotta find a way to include Junie into this
Right.
still because I mean, look at the season he's having
Yeah.
too. So without him, where would we be?
That's a good point.
Um, but and just yes, I do like I do like the nickname too because that seems to be the overarching name that I've been put under for the role this year.
Yes, because we refuse to call you closer. We are just calling you the
Right.
high leverage pitcher.
That's fine.
You mentioned Junis, you mentioned your experience, and a lot due to injuries, obviously, because the bullpen's pitched pretty well. But there's been a lot of in and out, a lot of new guys and everything. How do you're kind of the younger, experienced guy now out there. How do you guys obviously you pick stuff up from Jonas and Beeks and some of the veteran guys, but how does that whole dynamic work with you guys?
It's great. I mean, the bullpen dynamic is always unique and just one of my more favorite things about being, up here in the big leagues is having that group of guys. And this year in particular, we've had, I would say in years past too, there's always, a constant rotation between the younger guys with options and injuries and whatnot. And a lot of these guys this year I've played within the minor leagues and just known from being in the organization for a little while. But the veterans this year with Beeks and Alexander and now Quantrill, Martin, and we knew him from last year, so it's easy to talk about the experiences and what helps be successful in the bullpen, and then bring the younger guys into the mix when they come up there. And it's a lot of just like observing and seeing how to go about your business. And then I really feel like just the ability to keep things light down there and casually have a conversation about the most random things while the game is going on and while we're watching everything unfold too just helps like build a chemistry aspect and a freedom about going into the game and doing your job for that day that might be different from the starters or even the position players, because it's just you're engaged in the game 24/7.
Jake, before we let you get out of here, I just want to real quickly again just run through a couple of stats, right? At this point in time, I think you lead all relievers in baseball in WHIP at 0.61. You are in the top four in strikeout to walk rate. You are second or third in ERA. And I think when you factor in your start, you're third or fourth in WHIP. I mean, in WAR. It's a strong all-star case. And I know you're not thinking necessarily all-star game at this point in time, but the idea that you're being mentioned as an all-star, again, given the journey, given how this year started, like when you do allow yourself to go there, how surreal is it for you?
Yeah, that's one of the more surreal things. You know, honestly, it is. It's that one just doesn't feel real. If it were to happen, I mean, it would be something I've always striven for, but would not have really think that it would happen. If I get the votes, great. But yeah, it's different for sure. To be thought of as that type of player in the major leagues. So, um, we got to keep going. It's a long season. We're in June, mid-June. We got 3 more months. It's been a good start. It really has, but we just got to continue to stack these games and keep going. So and for me, I just got to put my head down and try not to think about anything like that until the season's over. I know you don't like that answer, but that's just where my headspace is at.
Yeah, well, I'd love for you to say something really colorful, but if you don't feel the need, I guess we'll just have to let it go. We'll allow that one to slide this time.
Well, luckily, Evan, the players do a pretty good job, of selecting the pitchers and the reserves. So hopefully things will go well in this regard. So, Jake, we really appreciate the time. This has been great. Thank you. Well, Evan, it's really interesting to talk to Jake because his path is pretty amazing. We didn't even get into the COVID start when they just they brought him up and said pitch in Cleveland and everything, and all the arm injuries he had, and it's really nice to see a guy like that have a lot of success.
Yeah, he's a guy that, even in my position, he's a guy that's easy to root for because of the journey, because of how well thought out his answers seem to be, and just how earnest he is about the job and the role. And this is a guy who could have been really unhappy when he was
Right.
not chosen for a starter's role, because he pitched well enough to earn a
As he
role in the
did. Yep.
rotation. And what he did was he took a role in the bullpen that really wasn't defined, and he's made himself into a 2026 unicorn. So,
Right.
all the credit in the world to Jacob Latz for doing this. And look, there's 3 great stories on this team this year, 3 great performances by Josh Young, Ezekiel Duran, and Jake Latz, and they all have like different kind of origins, but Jake's really been I don't even want to say an overachiever. He's just been a guy who has maximized his abilities.
Yeah. So we're going to, in that regard, the archives in Arlington this week, we're going to just kind of look back at a probably the greatest relief season if you took it overall in Rangers history. And it kind of relates to Jake and his role with pitching multiple innings and save situations and that kind of thing. So we're going to go back to 1979. Jim Kern, in his first year as a Ranger, was acquired from Cleveland, where he pitched great. He'd made all-star teams in 78, 7, and 78 with the Indians. And Bill James, about 10 years ago, I think, said that Jim Kern's body of work out of the bullpen with 3 years with the Indians, 76 to 78, and then the 79 season with Texas, was one of the greatest runs ever by a relief pitcher. And these numbers today, it's kind of like Fergie Jenkins in 1974 and his starter numbers. But that year, Kern was 13-5 with a 157 ERA. He pitched in 71 games. He threw 143 innings, 136 strikeouts, gave up only 5 home runs, and he had 29 saves. And the interesting thing about the saves was 25 of those were more than 1 inning. And even at that point, that was a lot. And I'll just run this by. So he finished 4th in the majors in saves. 3 guys ahead of him were pretty good relief pitchers. Bruce Sutter, 37 saves, only 21 of more than an inning. Mike Marshall pitched that year with the Twins, 32 and 19, and then Kent DeCulvey, who I really don't want to have a great memory about, was with the Pirates in 79. We Are Family, 31 and 17. And since that time, I did a little research, and Jeff Russell in 91 had 16 saves of an inning more, but then it goes down appreciably. And it was just a different era, Evan. But Kern that year, he threw hard. He was 6'5". He had a great fastball. He finished 4th in the Cy Young Award voting, 11th as the MVP, and was the American League Fireman of the Year, and then pitched 2 2/3 innings in the All-Star game and was the losing pitcher. But it was just a different era of baseball. But even in that era, that was quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, and I remember even as a kid, that 79 season, the emu stood out as kind of he was a rare bird in 79, and
so to speak.
Yeah, in a number of ways. But John, I'm looking here, right, and again, just to the Jacob Latz issue, Kern had, as you said, 22 saves of an inning, of at least an inning and a third in 79. The last time a Ranger had more than Latz's 6 4-out saves, the last time that happened was 2004, when Cordero had 9 saves.
And he had 49 saves. So, I mean, he pitched a lot of save situations.
So it just doesn't happen anymore. I don't know, and I've said this over and over again this year, even as this is has been done. This is a very valuable weapon, but it's also got to be very closely monitored.
Right.
I think the fact that he did have this kind of starting experience and had been stretched out does play well, but you can't run a guy out every other day, or on back-to-back days, time in and time out, the way the Rangers I don't want to say the way he's been used, but they've got to be careful not to overindulge in that temptation, because relievers just aren't built that way anymore. And if you end up with a situation here where in the second half of the season he's able to duplicate what he's done in the first half, I mean, it is going to stand out as one of the all-time great relief seasons for the Rangers.
Yeah, exactly, and you're right, and I'm sure, you know, in the situation the Rangers are in, where every game, you know, comes down to one or two things. There's a temptation when you're in that situation, in that save situation, to go to your best guy in the eighth inning. But that's also on the rest of the bullpen to be able to kind of help him minimize that pressure.
Well, in a lot of ways, it's also on the rotation, right? Because we've gone through this stretch here where the rotation has very, you know, has
Pitch
gone less
counts
than
are-
six
yeah.
innings on a number of occasions, and then so you've got to deploy your higher leverage arms earlier in the game than you would like to do it, and so it leads you to like having to get 4 or 5 outs to put everything away. But we're getting away from the archives here and getting too
Yes,
much
we
back
are,
to
but
Jacob Latz.
we'll talk about this in the. So just to kind of put a bow on Jim Kern, the 1979 season, he was rewarded with a 5-year contract by then owner Brad Corbett, who very soon after sold the team to Eddie Childs. Bottom line was the Emu did not pitch. He had some injuries, did not pitch very well. He was finally traded to the Mets after the 1981 season and finished it out. And the other thing about 1979 going into that season, Evan, Rangers also had Sparky Lyle in the bullpen that year. And Sparky going into spring training was going to be the closer, but Kern pitched so, and Lyle ended up with 16 saves. But as you know, Sparky Lyle at that point was one of the elite relievers. He'd won the Cy Young Award with the Yankees and everything. But Pat Corrales made it work. But Kern ended up pitching, you know, a long career, pitched till 86, and then had a very successful hunting and fishing expedition visit, Emu Outfitters, and still lives in Texas. 77 years old now, and not quite as eccentric as he was, but the stories about him in 79 and that with him and Sparky Lyle in that bullpen, I'm not sure we could repeat a lot of them here on the air, but he was a different bird, as you said, to say the least.
Well, and that was an era where we certainly embraced pitchers and their eccentricities, particularly of the avian variety, because we had Mark Friedrich in 1976.
Right.
And look, I mean, it was just a decent era, because I was just going back and looking at this, John. You know, in 74, Mike Marshall threw 106 games for the Dodgers.
Yes, he did.
Won the Cy Young that year, and pitched 208 relief innings. And eventually that caught up with that whole generation of relievers, which is why managers like Tony La Russa started using closers for 1 inning and 1 inning only, to protect them, to keep them fresher, to, you know, protect long-term health. But I think the game, everything that is new in the game is old. And I think the game is cycling back towards offensively some things about manufacturing runs, playing hard, optimizing run scoring opportunities. And I think in the bullpen, you know, the ability to go more than an inning is a very valuable resource. And I think, you know, Louis Varland is doing a lot of the same thing this year in Toronto. So
yeah, he is.
It's teams that have a weapon right now, but I also think teams, as we go forward, are going to look more and more often. Can we find that guy that we can use for an inning plus at the end of a game?
So what nickname did you finally come down on for Jake?
I think right now we kind of go in stages, but right now I think we're going with high leverage Latz. I like the alliteration. I like the play on the fact that we won't call him a closer. You know, and it doesn't. In those days, it doesn't require that Jacob Junis pitches in front of him, because I kind of like Jake and Bake early in the season, but you know, there are days now when you take Junis completely out of it because of Latz pitching 2 innings.
Right, exactly. So, well, we want to thank Jacob Latz for agreeing to be on the podcast today. And Evan, you got any closing thoughts here?
No, I'm just disappointed he didn't mention your age, John, because he did tell me early in the season, or maybe it was even last year when we were talking about the podcast. He said, "Wow, you and John Blake are doing that podcast. John's really old."
Oh, that's well, he's right about that, and I just celebrated another one, but I'm still younger than Jim Kern. So that will conclude this week's podcast, and we'll see you all next week.